Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our next session for Open SoCal's virtual seminars. We hope you and your families are doing well at this time. We are facing some interesting challenges. It seems like we have COVID on us, and now we have some interesting protest situations going on. We just hope you're all safe and well. We're not here to talk about politics. We're here to talk about something cool and positive. And with us today, I have a very unique person. I had the fortune of meeting this person through my workplace, and he's probably got one of the most unique roles in one of the most unique companies I've ever seen. So I really wanted to have him with us today. I'd like to welcome Jawad Ahsan, who's the CFO of Axon. Welcome, Jawad.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being with us today. So Jawad, just to get started real quick, and I think a lot of people, in fact, myself being in the industry I'm in, I didn't really know much about Axon and what you do. It'd be great to just kind of get a snapshot of, how you got here. Give us your journey and maybe a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start. I'll talk about the company. It's pretty exciting. I've never worked for a company that's got a mission like this. Our mission is to protect life. It started with Taser in 1993. Our founder and CEO, Rick Smith, started the company with his brother, and he had a vision to basically obsolete the bullet. That's still part of our mission today. He had two friends from high school that were killed in a road rage incident. They were shot to death in that incident. And he was in business school at the time and thought, this is unbelievable that people are still blowing holes in each other with hot lead balls. There's got to be a better way. And he got connected with Jack Cover, who was a former NASA scientist who had developed the underlying technology behind the Taser and hadn't really had much success commercializing it. So Rick and his brother joined forces with Jack, ended up commercializing it. It actually started as a consumer product that used to be sold in the Sharper image. Some of you may remember back in the 90s. And sort of stagnated, didn't really get a ton of traction. And then they pivoted into law enforcement. And that's where it really started to take off. The company went public in 2001. And initially, there was a lot of skepticism from law enforcement that something like this could be used. And now it's fairly ubiquitous. We're in 95% of agencies in the US, increasingly making inroads in various agencies across the world. And the idea is that you now, as a police officer, you have an option to use either less lethal or non-lethal force. So you don't have to automatically pull out your firearm. So I've been in this job for a little over 3 years now, and I can't tell you how many police officers I've met, and I meet with a lot of customers that have told me that the Taser has saved not only someone else's life, but in some cases, maybe their own life. I had an encounter with one particular officer who said he was on scene with his partner I believe it was a Starbucks, and there was a young 16-year-old girl who was locked in the bathroom. She was schizophrenic. She was having an episode, and she was in there with a knife. She comes out of the bathroom, brandishing the knife, and his partner had his gun, his firearm trained on her. He had his Taser, and he fired first with this Taser, brought her down, and they got her the help she needed. She's alive today. He has a relationship with that young woman. And he said, look, she's alive today because I acted first. She was coming at us, with the knife, and who knows what could have happened if my partner fired. And I hear stories like that all the time. So anyways, the company has had a lot of success with the Taser. We've saved over 200,000 lives in that fashion. And then a little over a decade ago, we got into body cameras. And that actually started, interestingly enough, through the Taser. We started seeing a lot of complaints and lawsuits being filed with the rise of the Taser. Mm-hmm. And we said, look, why don't we just put a Taser, a camera on the Taser itself so we can actually record the incident and see what happened. And it's fine in theory. The problem is most of the time your Taser is in a holster and the camera's pointing at the ground. So we said, all right, let's move the camera to the body, to the chest. So that's how the body camera segment was born. And we initially, there were a lot of competitors because a lot of people had this idea around the same time. And we ended up becoming the market leaders in the body camera, not so much because of the hardware, but because our approach from the beginning was to build a cloud-based infrastructure and to have the software be the differentiator. And today that segment is called digital evidence management. And that's effectively a way to manage all the video that you're collecting from these body cameras. Our competitors in the space, who are mostly on-premise, hadn't really made the investment in the technology, in the software, or in the back-end cloud management. They decided to differentiate on price and on hardware.
Mhm.
And like I said, we differentiated on software. And so ultimately that proved to be the winning strategy, because the law enforcement agencies we talked to today, they say they love the ease of use of our software. We acquired a company up in Seattle around the same time that we started our body camera business that was a consumer-facing business. We still have that office today. It's got over 300 people there now. It's our fastest growing office. And we regularly recruit from companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, some of the best software talent in the world. What's neat about that is these are super talented software developers, product managers that have the choice of where they can work. And they come to choose to work at Axon because they love the mission. They want to help protect lives. And so that success really gave us the courage and sort of the wherewithal to dare, like, hey, maybe we can become an enterprise software company. Maybe we should expand beyond just the taser and the body camera. And that's where we are today. We're making that transition. We've now made several large investments in police record software, dispatch. All of that is also cloud-based. That's another thing I can't tell you enough about, how customers come up to me and say, I wish Axon would build X version of evidence.com, which is our digital evidence management. X being, like I said, records, dispatch, case management, internal affairs, property management, all these different modules, software modules that law enforcement agencies use, that by and large are investments they made 20, 30 years ago. And I go to visit these agencies and there's still a lot of black screen and green text, a lot of Windows 95. Like, there are a lot of software that has been just sort of outdated now. And what you have is a demographics within the police force. It's younger, right? I mean, a lot of younger officers and sergeants and watch commanders that are, they want that newer technology. They want that consumer type UI, UX. They've got Apple watches and iPhones, and they're not the ones like sitting behind a desk all day. So as that sort of demographic changes, the need for Axon's software and our value proposition becomes that much more powerful. So that's sort of a history of where we've come as a company. Started with Taser, and today we're really more of an enterprise software company that also happen to sell devices such as the body camera and Taser. Taser is still very much central to our mission. We're still trying to work to obsolete the bullet, but we're now expanding beyond law enforcement to federal agencies, fire, EMS, and beyond.
That's an amazing story. And, it's very interesting, just my personal observation, especially in this current situation that we're facing, how, what you guys provide as a way to prevent, a bad situation. If this situation was utilized correctly, we probably wouldn't have been in the situation we're in right now. And I think that speaks all the more mounds to what you guys are doing. And I personally am very happy that you can continue to propagate this.
Yeah, it's interesting. For those 4 officers in the George Floyd incident were wearing Axon body cameras. They're actually wearing our latest ones that have a live streaming capability. That footage has not been released, but it absolutely has been viewed by the agency. And I believe it's part of the reason why charges have been brought. And so, we feel good about, obviously don't feel good about what happened, but we feel good that justice is being served.
No, and it's really, it's a very positive and a very good thing that, Axon as a company is doing. And I'm really happy to see that, because we see, look, the reality, you and I both know this, is, and I think sometimes we forget this, is we're human first, right? And humans are fallible and we make mistakes and things are going to happen. So having tools and capabilities that help us maybe diminish the fatal mistake is a great thing. So kudos to you guys, kudos to the company. I just wanted to move along, and here's and it's funny because, you and I we share a similar heritage. You're a little younger and a little better looking than I am, which is probably in your favor. But how does a young Pakistani immigrant kid growing up in the U.S. end up becoming the CFO of basically a defense company, right? I'm really intrigued by that, because we usually end up in these very standard careers, right? So tell me a little more about how that journey, how that happened.
Sure. My parents came here from Pakistan in the 70s. I was born in Boston. I have a younger brother. He and I were both born and raised in the Boston area.
Right.
And, my parents came here. They're both, they had done college in Pakistan. My dad did his master's here at Northeastern, engineers, and had, I guess we never really talked about like what we were going to get into from a career standpoint until I got into college. But growing up, it was a lot of just trying to figure out for myself how to make my way here. You know, when I was in college, when I was in high school, trying to figure out varsity sports and playing that and what that means, all the different activities. And, you know, that was something my parents couldn't really help out with because they didn't experience that. So I think a lot of, also the other thing is where I grew up in the Boston area, in one of the suburbs, it was a fairly homogenous, not very diverse town.
Right.
But I have a lot of people that look like me. And one thing that, you know, I didn't really realize until later is that I'm not only, you know, an ethnic minority, but also a religious minority.
Sure.
And so there's, you know, a lot that you don't have in common with a lot of people. So from the beginning, there was a lot I had to figure out for myself. And rather than waiting for people to tell me, I just said, you know, I got to figure this out myself because I got to find my way in the world. And I think that really was part of why when I got to college and, you know, my parents were like, well, you're going to be pre-med, right? You're going to either be a doctor or an engineer. And I went into college thinking like, okay, fine, I'll do that. I started my freshman year and got a C in chemistry. And it was devastating for my dad because my dad has his master's in chemistry. He's a chemical engineer.
Yeah.
You know? And he was crushed. And so I was trying to figure out, and the thing was, I just wasn't passionate about it. I felt like if I was passionate about it, I would have done better.
Sure.
But it just wasn't a passion. I was doing it because someone else wanted me to, or because like I felt like that was what I wanted to do, you know, what I needed to do. And so I went through my freshman year, just kind of listless a little bit. And there was a guy who was a senior who lived on my floor, and I was asking him for advice one night, like, I don't know what to do for a major. And he's like, well, what class did you do best in? Happened to be economics. And he said, well, that's what you should pick as your major. He's like, because that's probably the one that you feel the most passionate about. And that's what's going to drive you, you know, carry you through the next 3 years in college. So I was an economics major. And I remember that summer after my freshman year, I was talking to, we were at someone's house. It was some kind of a dawat or something. And people were talking about college and, you know, various studies. And someone had asked about how my pre-med stuff was going. And I said, oh, I'm an economics major now. And there was just silence in the room. And people were like, somebody said, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to become a teacher? And they were asking like in earnestness, right? Like they weren't, I don't think, trying to be put me down, but there just wasn't a lot of sort of support for something other than being a doctor and engineer. I think things are a little different now, but for me, it was never about like, I wanted to do something I was passionate about. So I did the economics major, graduated from college and went to go work for GE. And with GE, it was a leadership development program that they had. It actually was called the Financial Management Program. It's one of the oldest in the country. It still exists today. It started in 1914. To my knowledge, it might be one of the oldest in the country. And a lot of the leadership development programs today are patterned after that. A lot of GE's former CFOs, CEOs, a lot of their leadership team came up through that finance program. So it had a very strong pedigree. And that program is followed by an internal audit staff where you basically become an internal consultant within GE. I did both of those programs.
Okay.
It was so transformative. So initially I signed up to go to GE. I wanted to do the program and then go get my MBA. I figured I'd go do this for a couple of years and then go get my MBA. And then, because an MBA was another thing that I felt like was sort of like, you know, you get that because, okay, if you're not going to be a doctor and engineer, well, then clearly, you know, you got to go be an MBA or get an MBA. And I think it was more because I just didn't know. I didn't have anyone to tell me like, here's all the different options to you from a career standpoint outside of either being a physician or an engineer. And now, like for me, like when I have two boys, like I'm able to tell them like, here's what a career in finance, for example, or business might look like. It's not one thing. It's so multifaceted. There's so many different ways that you can go. And even today, when I like to tell people when they ask me about how I got to where I am, I like to say I'm actually not a great finance person. Like I'm not a traditional CFO in the sense that I never worked on Wall Street. I wasn't an investment banker. I'm not a CPA, so I'm not like an accountant, or I wasn't a controller or anything like that. I came up through GE's leadership training program and got a heavy dosage of FP&A, which is financial planning and analysis, really strategic corporate finance. That's what my strength was. And actually my big strength, my superpower, I would consider to be putting together, building, and maintaining very high performing teams.
Awesome.
That's one of the things that I probably learned, the biggest thing I learned at GE, because they put such a big focus on people development and on the HR function. It just becomes ingrained in you, is how to read people, how to, develop them, how to put together, assemble a team, how to motivate them, coach them, etc. That to me is my biggest superpower. In fact, after I got to Axon, when I first came to Axon, I had only the finance function, and they've now given me IT organization reports into me, our legal organization reports into me, our consumer business reports into me as well, just because I wanted to have something to sort of play GM on the side, and our CEO is happy to oblige. It's a fairly small business, so it's fairly low stakes. Don't worry for Axon shareholders. And then our corporate strategy and business process transformation functions also reported to me. So I've got a pretty big span of the organization at Axon. And it started with the economics major and really being passionate about business processes and people.
That's fantastic. What a cool story. And always nice to hear these very unique, stories. We're, as you know, part of Open, with Silicon Valley, we have these very traditional technology tracks that people follow. But your foray into this world is very unique because you came to a traditional product company who's now becoming a very robust enterprise software player. So it's a cool and interesting journey. And on the back of that, Jawad, what I wanted to ask you, and I think I'm going to ask you to take off your Axon hat for a minute here, because
Sure.
I don't want you to incriminate yourself corporately. But, a lot of challenging times we're in today. There's a lot of wounds that have been opened up, and what I'm seeing, my personal observations are, it's almost a drawing and a quartering, right? You see people going to either sides of this issue. And the fact remains is, folks like us are in a weird spot, right? Because we're ethnic minorities religiously and from a cultural perspective, but we're also kind of in mainstream America. So what do you see going forward? What's coming out of this? And I obviously you don't have a crystal ball, but it's just good to understand, get your perspective based on what you're doing.
Yeah, we've been having a lot of discussion about this internally. I'm the diversity and inclusion sponsor for the company, and we've had so many discussions internally. We've had several town halls with all of our employees, but in the beginning of last week, we had it specifically with our Black employees.
Sure.
I think what was most eye-opening for me and for our leadership team was when we were having these discussions, and we had about 30 of our Black employees on a call and gave them an opportunity to share their experiences. And we said, look, we're here to listen, and we want to hear about what challenges have you faced, and how has this manifested, like some of these, challenges have manifested themselves for you in your career, specifically at Axon. We were absolutely stunned with what we heard. We had a sales employee who's been here for about 3 or 4 years. He said he's been pulled over. He's on the road a lot. He's a sales engineer, and he's on the road a lot. He got pulled over about 15 times in 3 years.
Wow.
And in one incident, I'll share 2 incidents with you. One, he was pulled over I believe in Georgia, and there was a female police officer, white. She walks up to him in the car, and he was trying to tell her, he's like, hey, I work at Axon. Obviously, he was like answering her questions, but then he was trying to like interject the fact that he worked at Axon.
Right.
And she wasn't interested. He noticed that she was, and the reason he said that is because he noticed she was wearing one of our body cameras and wasn't recorded, and she should have been recorded. Okay. And so he was trying to tell her that, and she told him to shut up. And so she then walks back to her car. He had a device in his car where he could remotely activate her camera. So he did, and she shut it off, and then he kept turning it back on. And then she came back and was like, what's going on here? And then she finally listened to him and told her that he's an Axon employee. And he said that her demeanor completely changed. She became very polite. And he's like, I can't imagine, like, what about all the young black men that were pulled over that didn't, weren't in my situation? Another incident, he was visiting a sheriff's office in South Carolina, and they told him that, we're a historically accurate law enforcement office. And he's like, I don't know what that means, but they start giving him a tour, and they take him to the jail. There's a noose in the corner of the jail.
Oh boy.
The sheriff brings him into his office to sit down and talk about business. He sits down behind a desk, and behind the desk on the wall is a shadow box with a Ku Klux Klan robe and hood in a, like basically framed. And he's like, I didn't think anyone would believe me. So he took a picture of it and he shared those pictures with us on the call. And so that was probably some of the more extreme examples, but we had other examples of Black employees talking about, subtle racism that they've encountered at work or with customers, with law enforcement. And everyone, I think, said they sort of felt like we've just suppressed this. We've not said anything, we've not raised it because we didn't really think anything was going to be done or could be done. And frankly, we've been dealing with this our entire lives outside of Axon. And what we told them was like, look, this is not acceptable, right? We have relationships with law enforcement going back the better part of 3 decades. I've personally met police chiefs from major cities like Carmen Best in Seattle and Jerry Williams here in Phoenix, Art Acevedo in Houston. Actually, Chief Acevedo, he was in the news recently for speaking out against President Trump. He's a fantastic leader. There are lots of police chiefs out there. There are lots of leaders of police forces out there that are more like that are more like those people than there are folks that have a Ku Klux Klan, hood in their office. And that's just part of what's changing in the country is like I said, the demographics are changing. There's more willingness from law enforcement to engage in these types of discussions. So I think step one is that there's now more awareness, right? I don't think anyone ever thought that racism was over. I know some people take this view of like, oh, we live in a post-racial world. Like, that's not true. That's not true. I think that's typically the minority. I think most people recognize that we still have a lot of work to do.
Right.
And I think what is now happening is people are willing to engage more in those discussions. Like, okay, what exactly are we? First, let's hear from our employees. From our Black employees. Let's give them a voice. Let's give them a platform. And then second, now how do we move beyond that to actual, action and steps? And that's to be seen. We announced last week that we added a new board member, Adrienne Brown. She's a Black woman. She served on the board of Raytheon and eBay. And this might seem like a knee-jerk reaction. It's actually not. It's typically, it takes months to add a board member. And we started those discussions with Adrienne months ago. So we've added a Black board member. We're constantly on the lookout for, Black candidates to fill executive roles as they come open. And that's still continuing today. We've got an opening for a chief marketing officer. I think that this is also something we've talked about internally is making sure that we have a pipeline, a bench of Black employees that can fill succession planning. So I think it's gonna also involve recognizing that the socioeconomic conditions that some Black employees come from, it's just different. Like we had a couple of our younger Black employees say, hey, I've always wanted to go get my MBA or some type of a master's or something to supplement my education, that I got undergrad. And I've seen my white employees do it. And in some cases, their parents paid for it. And
Gotcha.
Right, yeah. I can't afford that. Like, is Axon willing to help? And we're also entertaining those types of discussions.
Understood. No, that's great. Well, I'm glad to see that, you guys are looking forward and figuring ways out. And I'm glad my assumption at this point is, you're really helping to drive and embody these values because of your role as a chief diversity and inclusion officer. That's a great thing. And it makes, I think as a part of the Pakistani community, that's a great thing, because you're putting a stake in the ground out there. You're doing something different. You're not just hiding away and hoping that it all goes away. You're really in front of it. So that's kudos to you. And I'm really happy that, to hear and learn about folks like yourself. So with that, is there anything else you'd want to share with us at this point, or I can let you get back to your weekend?
Yeah, I'd say for folks out there, either earlier in their careers, or even if you're mid-career and you're thinking about a switch, like it's never too late. I think you need a roadmap. One thing I realized, even when I was into my career at GE, probably about 8 or 9 years in, I was working hard, keeping my head down. Actually, I delayed going to get my MBA because what I realized was that I was learning more on the job than I thought I would, in a classroom.
Fair enough.
I eventually went to go get my MBA, but only after I felt like my learning at work had stagnated and it was really going to add something to me, into my skill set. And so I would say for folks that are trying to, figure out maybe I guess what's a non-traditional career still, right? Either in finance or in business, I would say that you should define for yourself a North Star, right? That I did that about 12 years ago.
Right.
I was, like I said, just sort of waiting for someone to tap me on the shoulder and say, "Hey, good job in your last role. Go take this next role." What I realized was that if I kept doing that, I was going to end up where other people wanted me. And so I said, "Look, you know what? I want to define for myself where I want to end up." And that was to run a business. All right. And I said, if I want to run a business someday, and a proxy for that is a CEO. I wasn't so fixated on the title as I was the actual job content. And so I said, all right, how do I get to become a CEO? And I worked backwards from there. And I said, well, I should probably get to the top of my function first in finance. And so I got to a divisional CFO role at GE. I did 3 of those. And then I became a private equity backed CFO, then had the opportunity to become a public company CFO. And what that did was it really focused me, and it made me a lot pickier about the roles that I took. And people would come to me and make me offers or try to recruit me or headhunt me. And they were like, prior to doing something like this, I would have taken the job because it was like an extra 25, 30% in pay. And who doesn't like, getting paid more, but it wasn't fitting my narrative. It wasn't fitting into my overall career arc of where I wanted to go. And so I started turning things down and getting a lot pickier about experiences. I really wanted to get experiences that would get me to become a CFO and ultimately like a standalone CFO. And now where I'm at, because I tell people this story and people say, well, that's still your North Star to be a CEO? And I would say, yeah, it is. Like, I would love to maybe someday do that, but it's not like if I stopped right now and end up staying here at Axon and then retiring, I'd be pretty happy because I feel like I'm running a business, right? Like I talked to you about the span of the organization I have here, and I feel like I get along really well with the rest of the executive team. I have a fantastic relationship with Rick, our CEO, and it feels like we're collectively running the business together. I never really was chasing that title. It was more about the job experiences. And so I'm kind of living my dream right now. So I would say, to anyone out there in a similar situation, trying to figure out where to go, define your North Star. Start with the end in mind and then work backwards from there.
That's phenomenal. Well, it's really great that you've been able to share this, and you can rest assured as part of Open, we're not going to let you just go away that easily. So I'm gonna be picking on you for some more inputs and environments like that. I'm not going to put you on the spot here, but we'll talk about that offline. But I really wanted to thank you for your time today. We really appreciate that. Appreciate the messaging, what you've shared from a story perspective. It's always nice to get a different perspective from what you see in the press only. So this has been really, really unique. And to our audience out there, we hope you enjoyed this. We're trying to bring you unique and varied content. Please continue to contribute. Give us feedback and commentary if you like this. Let us know what else you'd like to see. And with that, I wish you the best, Jawad. It was great to have you on, and I look forward to continuing our conversations.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you.